Welcome to the Energizing America podcast, where we talk all things energy and why we need it in our business, in our lives, in our communities. Boy, today we got a huge topic, the Inflation Reduction Act. You know, we can talk politics and all the details around this Inflation Reduction Act. There's some really cool details in this Inflation Reduction Act as we talk as a country, as we're going to be going through a fairly big energy transition.
That's a fact.
What do you think about the current crisis in Europe?
Well, one thing I want to be clear about up front is, in my mind, this has nothing to do with politics and everything to do with policy. It doesn't really matter to me who the person is and what letter they have behind their name. What matters to me is the policies they generate and what comes from them policies, because like you just mentioned, the European energy crisis. And I'm not a positive if a lot of people are paying attention to what's going on in the world. I guess my hope is if they were, things wouldn't be headed the direction they're headed.
Yeah, I mean, I think it clearly speaks of a need to have a conversation, a national conversation about our energy, where we source it, and how we do it in the best fashion. And certainly this Inflation Reduction Act is going to help push the energy transition more into a renewable sector. And that's not a bad thing.
Correct.
The thing that we don't want to forget as we do the transition is that there's still a need for the traditional energy sources until we're complete with the transition. And I think that's a lesson that we can take from Europe, right?
For sure.
I mean, they've done a great job with their renewable energy. They've done a great job of setting up goals to shut down their fossil fuels, and they've had to kind of dial back those goals a bit because they tried to move too quickly. And we can hope that we do it a little bit differently. And I think the IRA is a start.
For sure. I hope that the country cares, or actually the world cares more about lifting people out of economic downturn, that how energy impacts people's day-to-day lives like that. For example, there's a lot of people in, let's say, third world countries where they spend the bulk of their day literally walking around finding firewood so they can create a fire inside their hut, which puts off more pollutants inside their hut than if they had a clean burning propane little stove. It would make a world of difference and impact people's lives immensely.
Right.
Which is, a little bit different than in Switzerland. They're talking about whether this is true or not. I'm not 100%, but they said it in the newspaper, so it must be right. This winter, if you set your thermostat above 66.6 degrees, there's potential that you could spend 3 years in jail.
I've read much of the same stuff, and I've actually researched over in Europe that there's a lot of this stuff is real. It's very real. If you're living in Europe, you're not wondering if it's real because you read it in the paper. You're impacted by it, right? And I just think the big takeaway is let us learn from there. And let us be careful. And so when you talked about poverty a bit, the Inflation Reduction Act, one of the things I have to say I appreciate about it is that it actually gives real money to folks to make real improvements to their homes and hopefully to their energy bill in the long run. And that might be one of the missing components over in Europe, is they haven't quite gotten it down to the level of the individual making a difference in their own home. And we talk about that a lot when, we do these monthly solar classes and the like. We talk a lot about what can we do individually to help out the energy crisis. And put your own opinions aside, put your own thoughts about the crazy politics around it, and instead focus on this policy. We got the solar energy, or the Inflation Reduction Act. There's tons of provisions in there that folks can take advantage of. And it's time for us. The money's there, folks. And newsflash, it never goes back to the people. It kind of stays in the pot until the people use it.
It's a one-way street.
Very much a one-way street. I was excited about the fact that it's acknowledging that for folks to electrify their future, a lot of homes, especially in the Twin Ports area of Duluth, Minnesota, they lack the basic infrastructure to even convert to electric stoves. In order to do that, you oftentimes have to upgrade your service. That comes at a high cost. How do those folks pay for it? And so I was quite excited about the various, and we can get into some of the specifics on that. That's a huge piece of it. And then also what it did for the solar industry. I think there's about I don't know if you can say rebound because it's been on a surge. It's going to even be more so.
Yeah, no, there is so many cool things in this act. Let me get a couple caveats out of the way, maybe.
Yeah.
Let's not call it the Inflation Reduction Act. Even the Congressional Budget Office said best case scenario, which is a nonpartisan department, 0.01% effect on the inflation.
Right. funny name.
Rename it.
It was a funny name in order
Yes.
to get maybe one senator
Yes.
to swing his vote.
Right. But no, there are so many interesting and cool provisions in there that will benefit a lot of people. The other caveat that we've talked about before is our power generation system that we have now, our grid. That with all this stuff going electric, can our grid handle it?
Yeah.
And the answer today is no. We do want to get there, and we are headed that direction. Let's do it the right way.
Right. And I think that's what made it difficult for me even to get support behind the Inflation Reduction Act. And until it was passed, I almost didn't even want to learn about it.
Yep.
But here it is. It's passed. It's in front of us. There's opportunity for folks who want to do something to go ahead and do it. And there's also opportunity, by the way, for businesses who are in these various sectors to capitalize on some really cool ideas. There's other caveats, John. We already know, because we do solar projects, we already know there's massive supply constraints. We know there's been a significant supply disruption, especially in the solar industry, because of tariffs and various rules. And that's not going away anytime soon. There's a lot of money in the Inflation Reduction Act to further incentivize American companies to bring that manufacturing back over here. But that's not going to happen overnight.
Tomorrow.
I mean, that production is so vital to everything in America. My point is that think about how much production pressure just to get that line back up and running. Because if something goes down, the amount of time to recover from it is huge. And I don't know that we've recovered from the 2020 disruptions yet.
Well, we haven't. Think about this solar project we've done so far in the area. All done, ready to go, missing one component. And guess what?
We can't flip the switch.
Can't flip the switch.
And that is so disruptive to us because we ordered those components in March. The supplier had thought they had the components from their distributor, and they went to go hit the ship button, and guess what? It wasn't there.
Yep.
8 months later, it's still not here, and it looks like we're not going to have it until next spring. And so the individual, the company who makes that investment into their solar field and pulls up every day and looks at this awesome idea of generating your own power, but whoops, don't have an inverter. And we scoured the world for these inverters.
My understanding is there's one, and it's in China. I don't. It's just frustrating when you have all the momentum going, and then you still have the supply chain issues. And like you said, it's not a domestic product that we have to get. We're relying on countries that aren't necessarily friendly to the U.S. for these components to take steps towards a greener future.
Right. Yeah, I was real hopeful that we could get that one from China. I think I heard otherwise, that it turns out they don't have one there. It was one of those dead-end chases, but we'll hope for the best. But I think, long term, the Inflation Reduction Act will, and just the disruptions. Americans are still the best people in the world, and they're going to figure this out. We're going to get those factories going back in our own home country, and we're going to be the best exporter there is of all these goods. But specifically with the solar provisions, we touched a little bit that there's a bunch of residential good things to electrify your home. But then in the solar industry, they're excited. The SIA is all over this, which is
as they should be.
Right. The industry trade group folks, and they've increased the tax credit from 26% to 30%. So that's step one, right? That tax credit was actually due to expire. So I think in the industry, we all agreed that it was going to have some sort of an extension. Not tons of us felt like it would increase. Of course, with the cost increases, I'm not sure that the
4% makes a difference.
Right. Well, it certainly at least keeps people in the game.
Yes.
Right. And I think as we go forward, too, there's some ways that can be increased. But 30% tax credit for doing your solar system is pretty good. And I don't know, did you catch that? Is that retroactive to January 1st of 2022?
Yes.
So these are projects that if you've already done solar this year, or you just needed that little 4% push, now is the time, folks, because that tax credit is here, and it's not changing all the way until 2033. I did a little pondering on this. Okay, so if it's 30% now, and I do solar, because I did solar last year, so I got the 26% because I'm really good with timing things. And so I thought, well, what if somebody does it at 30%? When is it going to go to 50? When's it going to go to 60? When's it going to go to 70? But the particular act that the tax credit came from originally, it was capped at 26% and it never went higher than that.
Gotcha.
So I think that this is probably a pretty solid spot at 30% for several years before it has any chance of going up. And by the way, what's the point of a tax credit? It's to incentivize people to do something. Once enough people do it, we lack the incentive to to continue. And like you said, I think our grid is at a point where it could break if too many people do it too.
Right. We won't go down that road right now.
Well, because we can't do anything about that, right? What we're talking about is the Inflation Reduction Act and the good things that came from it. When you talk about the residential efficiency, what were a couple of the things that you found in there?
Well, first I looked at the total numbers, and the numbers I found were there's $9 billion in home energy rebates and 10 years, like you mentioned, worth of tax credits. And for someone like myself who actually happens to be planning to build a home right now, I mean, there's all kinds of incentives to make your home more comfortable, i.e. energy efficient, to save you. I mean, if you get energy efficient windows, heat pumps, the appliances you choose, the service you choose as far as your electrical panel, all these things come into play. The insulation, I think them were the big things that really caught my eye, that it makes sense. So I grew up here, then I moved out west as a teenager and into, well, we'll say adulthood, even though I feel like I'm still working on that part of it. So when I moved back here, I was 29 years old, married, had children, moved into a house. And I moved into this older house that didn't have very good insulation. And it never even crossed my mind how much of an effect that would have on my propane tank. I was just happy to be back in Minnesota, moved into the house. Turns out, had I had the right insulation, had I had good windows, had I had a heat pump, all these things would have had a huge impact on, number one, the comfortability of living in the home, hot spots and cold spots, but also on my pocketbook. So that's what I love about this act, is there's a lot of things in there that I think of as win-win. It does actually make your life better, more comfortable, and it's energy efficient.
There's always been this barrier for the average American to do more with their energy. The barrier is financial.
Yes.
It's not cheap to go hire a contractor to come in and change out your appliance, right? Especially if you're talking a heating appliance.
Yes.
It's not cheap to go hire an insulator and have them come make your home more energy efficient. So having the tax credits is a great way to get people there. Now, there's still the problem about the upfront cost. We still lack in this bill. I couldn't find anything that says, Susie homeowner, we're going to give you upfront the money. I did find a big difference when it comes to solar. One of the impacts of the tax credit that historically has been available for solar is it left out all the municipalities, all nonprofits, and just governmental entities, because they don't pay income. They don't have any tax to write off, right?
Right.
So now under this Inflation Reduction Act, they actually get a direct pay, what they call a direct pay rebate from the federal government of 30%. So it's tons of incentive for these businesses, that even a nonprofit, if they truly care about their impact. And by the way, there is a long list of folks who are nonprofits simply for the green energy, and they're all preaching about green energy and how we should do things differently. Now they can step up to the plate and help us out, and they can do their part because they can go ahead and spend the money on the solar system, get the 30% direct pay rebate, and they're just like us, right? We did it at our home, we did it at our business. Now it's up for the nonprofits, especially those who are after a cleaner future, to step up to the plate and use that direct pay program. There's some details on that direct pay program that are still forthcoming, but I think that's going to be huge. You think about how many government buildings have a flat roof.
Almost every one.
Free real estate for a cool solar system, right? And now, in addition, a 30% credit from the federal government. And I think, there's some responsibility on our municipalities to think about their future energy costs. Because what have we talked about at Westcom with the future energy costs?
I think they're going one direction.
Yeah. And based on the electrification of the future, they're only going that one direction. So moving away from the solar, back to the energy efficient home rebate program, I found the heat pump for a water heater, you can get up to $1,700. For HVAC, you can get $8,000. You move to electric stove, cooktop range, oven, or a heat pump for your clothes dryer, they'll give you $840. And, there's always been those type of credits around. But the difference in this act is this has got 50% if you're anywhere from 80 to 150% of the median average household income. So that's a pretty general. It used to be 30%. So it went up to 50%. That's a really attractive deal if you spend $3,000 to insulate your home and you qualify for that 50% tax credit, that's significant. But if you fall under 80% of the area's median income, you actually get 100%. That's really huge. I, again, go back to, tax credits don't do tons of good for people who lack the money up front to pay for it. And for some reason, I have yet to meet a contractor, maybe you have, that is willing to do the project for free or wait until you get your tax rebate. They seem difficult to find. So, but one of the things that this act really did a good job of was adding for an electric load service center and electric wiring up to $6,500, $4,000 and $2,500. So what this means is a lot of times when folks and we get service calls all the time.
Yep.
Folks are calling us because they had a local mechanical contractor come in and put in a heat pump for them, and now they need to upgrade their electric service to allow for that heat pump. Well, previously, the only thing that qualified for this tax credit was the work that the mechanical contractor did. Well, now they can actually take advantage of that on the electric side as well. And I think that's huge.
So that's part of the tax credit, though.
That's part of the tax credit.
Yeah.
So, and it's a maximum credit, right? With all of these things. And as I think time, the great thing about Congress is they can pass a 100-page bill within like 30 seconds. It's a yay or nay. Everyone raises their hand. Then the bill gets done, and that's when all the dirty details. I've often wondered, well, John, who does that?
That's right.
I want to be on that committee to do the dirty details in the back. You know what I mean? I'd way rather do that than say yes or no.
I always picture, they say,
yeah,
right? There's this room somewhere that says they on the outside, and you open the door, and there's just a bunch of people saying they. Yeah. They say that.
Well, there's something
the dirty
because
little deeds.
What was it was billions that you said in the beginning that this act is providing $9 billion?
$9 billion.
So, and the $9 billion gets passed, and then they, in that room, say how it's going to get allocated. And so there's a lot of details that, I hope folks don't listen to this and go make a decision on it without doing their own research.
Well, funny little story. Our salesman, I'm sure he told you about calling the Department of Energy to figure something out for a local business that wanted some solar put on their building. And my understanding is he made it all the way to one of the people that wrote the bill. And he asked them some specific questions about how exactly does this work? And the guy's answer was, I don't know. We haven't figured that out yet. So it's exactly right.
So they say haven't got together yet.
They haven't got together yet.
But the reality is any federal money generally funnels through the state, and then the state has to adopt the money and backfill it. And that particular program that he was inquiring on falls under that set of circumstances. Whereas these tax credits, they're fairly clear cut.
Yes.
Right? You file your tax return, you're going to get the money. One thing, all of these are refundable tax credits from what I could tell, which is really powerful, meaning that even if you don't owe income tax, you're still going to get the money back to help with the project. So I think any service contractor, and we do get service contractors who dial in and listen in, right? Those folks better buckle up. It's going to be a busy year.
Well, like I said, it's a win-win. People have the opportunity to be more efficient and make their lives more comfortable.
And I think right with it as well, it's going to give that added little push for folks, especially business owners, to go solar, because a lot of businesses have mandates, right? The communities they operate in, their consumer base, whoever their client is, they want them to be more renewable. And so it's like one project we did, the individual told me he's only doing this because he has to. I don't care why people are doing it, right? I'm just going to satisfy whatever their need is. But that 30% direct pay rebate, and then there's billions of dollars going through the state, and who knows how they're going to be willing to spend it. The state of Wisconsin, boy, do they have an amazing program for folks who want to go solar. Not only do you get the 30% tax credit, but they have a pot of money grouped into various types of businesses. If you're a municipal organization, you fall in this pot. If you're a residential, you fall in this pot. If you're a commercial entity, you fall in this pot. The project that we looked at recently, over 45% of the project cost either comes from a rebate from the federal government or a rebate from the state of Wisconsin.
Sign me up, baby.
Well, you first have to move to Wisconsin, and we have some guys that work from there. So what do you say about that?
Change my mind.
But I think there's...
That was for you, Terry.
Yeah. I think there's some opportunity for those folks in Wisconsin especially, and I'm sure the state of Minnesota will get there. I wonder, too, with the Inflation Reduction Act, that despite its desire to do good things, how do we bridge this gap? I just feel like it's missing, John, that everyone wants the same outcome, and so we're shoving money down through a tax return. But how do we get that money up front? And I was at our solar class the other night, and there's a local bank in town here. in the Twin Ports who's offering a solar loan, specific solar loans, and they will give you a 2.5% interest rate. 2.5. I just read this morning that mortgage interest rates are over 6%. But for 2.5%, you can go get the money up front for your solar project and complete it. So my question to her was, what about if I want a new heat pump? And her response, well, you'd have to apply for a home equity loan. Well, home equity loans are, at prime plus a certain percentage and generally not a very cheap way of getting money. So I feel like our country keeps missing, one of two things. Either one, make the generation of the electricity cheaper. We're certainly not doing that. Or two, give the money to the consumer to make it cheaper. That's what they're doing in Europe right now, right? Europe, the energy bills are so scary to the consumers over there, and they're all freaking out about it, that they capped it. And the European government, who knows how they get their money, right? The Chinese or whatever, they're just adding to their deficit like everyone else until 2024. That's how they're dealing with it. And I feel a little bit nervous about this act in that respect.
There's a sense of irony to me in this whole situation where $80 billion going to the IRS so they can hire more people to do more enforcement, so you can pay more taxes, so we can pay for this whole thing. So it's just kind of this, you're right, there's a disconnect on the whole thing. Or the 15% corporate tax rate on any corporation making over $1 billion. Whether that's right or wrong, I don't know. I'm kind of a capitalist at heart, so we can have the discussion on another day. But I agree that if things are important, we have to figure out how to pay for them and how to do it right.
One of the things that this Inflation Reduction Act on the investment tax credit or the Production Act credit allows on a solar production anyways and renewable sites, if you go out to Wyoming in the coal country and you do a solar production facility there, you're going to get the 30%. Allegedly, if you use prevailing wage requirements, which that one was really surprising to me until I remembered what kind of administration we have, you can get out another 10%. For using prevailing wage. That starts once they come up with the rules about it. Until then, that 10% isn't available. So that's really interesting to me as well. No, that 10% is available, but they don't have the rules for it yet. And once they adopt the rules, you have 60 days to adhere to the rules. So I have a feeling the rules will never come out because that's usually what happens in those situations. What is there? Another 10% if you do it in economically
challenged areas.
Economically challenged areas. But what's the area about if you go into where there's a transition underplay? What do they call it? A green community switch? The terminology is eluding me right now. You have the details right here. It's called the additional 10% for placing the project within energy community locations. So on the Department of Energy website, there's a map of the United States of America, the greatest place on the earth. And as you zoom into it, you can see there's these yellow places and there's these brown places and then there's all the other areas, right? So these yellow places are places where the economies have been significantly supported by traditional forms of energy, like our friends over in Wyoming, like our friends in the Dakotas, and various other areas where coal is produced. Gotcha. Those folks, if a solar developer will go to those areas and employ those people, they'll get another 10%. So the way it looks like is between the original 30%, the additional 10% for placing it within the energy community, the 10% for using 100% iron, steel, and over 40% of the components made in America. So you got 30, 40, 50% right there. And then another 10 to 20%, depending on if the community is low income or not. And that's also on that sheet it shows. There's some additional provisions if there's some brownfields and the like. That's a lot of the cost getting paid. And so I really thought, why would we give that 50% of a project refund? That's a lot, John.
That's a lot. Like I said, I'm starting a house project, so if someone would give me 50%,
you'd be pretty excited.
That would be pretty exciting.
But I think I figured out why. I don't know that I figured it out. I have an opinion as to why. The more solar production we get, and the more solar fields we see, and the more people that work on them, the more norm it's going to become, and the more the country is going to be willing to adopt it. I just caught an article. We went to a chicken farm down in central Minnesota, and talk about awesome. Like, I didn't realize that by the way, the original owner, a farmer, right, still owns this place, and he now sends out over 1 million eggs a day. Did you know the average American eats 1 egg a day? That's how they figured out. 330 million eggs are produced in Northern America. in North America, 330 a day.
It's a lot of eggs.
And it's all automated. They have all these machines that, I mean, talk about incredible. But the point is I had a little bit of time on the way home to be doing some research, and we do some work for a paper mill in and around the same area. And that particular area has a coal-fired generation plant. In this community, I can't remember how many people reside there, but they're under a mandate to close the coal facility down, right? And so this community is really struggling to figure out, I think it's by 2026, maybe even 2030, that the final plant gets shut down. They're trying to figure out what are they going to do. It's the only thing in that, besides the paper mill, is this coal electrical generation plant.
Yep.
So I found what they're planning to do is Xcel Energy is going to spend at a minimum, they can't disclose the final amount because that would be disclosing what the competitive bids are on the solar project apparently, but it's going to be around $575 million to take well over 3,000 beautiful, tillable farming acres, and they're going to convert it into a solar field because they're going to shut this coal plant down, right? Sounds great. Like the community is excited. They're going to have a $575 million investment. There's going to be over 900 good paying construction jobs. And we can get all excited about that, right?
Yep.
And I did. I thought, well, that's cool for that community. And then I wondered how many people work at the coal plant on a regular basis. So I did a little bit of research and I found 280 people work at the coal plant. And I thought, okay, well, there's going to be 900 in this construction of this facility. That's pretty cool. Probably take a couple years. But how many people are going to work on there ongoing? Because I'm sure when they built the coal plant, there was probably 4,000 people at that time. But just for context, I want to know how many people are going to work at the solar plant when it's all done. And there's going to be an impressive 8 people operating that plant. I don't know what the other 222 people in that community from the coal plant are going to do, but it didn't appear like the article cared about that because they're going to have 1 year of this big economic boom. And so the sustainability of that transition has me worried. And so this is a really cute deal that you can get another 10% for going to one of these energy communities and doing a solar project. I didn't see anything that community is going to get a revolving 10% refund every year for putting up with the transition. I don't know what those communities are going to do.
Right. And that brings something to mind as far as being this short-sightedness, like we kind of started out with this. The natural gas produces something that we use all the time besides heat, and it's used in the food industry as fertilizer, right? So currently today, there's approximately 8 billion people on the planet. And with 8 billion people on the planet, we need a lot of food. So I read a study that if we got rid of using the fertilizer that is produced with the help of natural gas, that the planet could sustainably feed 2 billion people. Well, I'm not great at math, but I know that 8 minus 2 is 6. And that's a lot of people that would go hungry without the use of fertilizer. So in the short-sightedness of a transition, let's think about the 6 billion people, the same as the people that are working at the coal plant and are now going to be doing, we don't know what it is. Don't forget about, if you want to go from A to B, what it takes to go from A to B.
Here's the situation. We're trying to get from A to B. How do we get there? Right? That conversation is missing in the real world. There's no one saying that we can't use solar. Listen, I'm in the oil and gas business. 70% of our revenues come from oil and gas, if not more. And I have solar on my house and I have solar at my shop. But I'll tell you, I love that oil and gas, especially overnight or like today when it's cloudy out. Because I would be one cold human being without it, and I might have a disgruntled family as well.
It's one thing to talk about Europe, but did you catch what they did in Denver?
The utility company convinced a bunch of folks that you should use this smart thermostat. And, they can set them and do all this thing, and it gives them all these reports. Well, there's a piece behind the scenes that apparently they forgot to read. And the fine print is that allows the utility company in times of need to take over their thermostat and set it at whatever temperature they deem necessary.
80 degrees.
It was 80 degrees.
Yep.
The interesting part about our energy transition and what we try and talk about a lot at Westcom, if we truly want to talk about energy issues, we should talk about consumption. The same folks who are out there preaching that we should go with renewable as our sole source, I'm not talking about the people who understand we need a mix.
Correct.
Right? But the people who think that there's a one and done approach and that is only using renewables effective immediately. Those same people when the local utility takes over their thermostat and puts it at 80 degrees, are the first ones to take to Twitter and LinkedIn and Facebook and whatever social media they have and just start complaining about big bad utility companies. And really, who's at fault there?
Well, you should read the fine print for starters, right? But that's what I mean is let's do this the right way and responsibly, and we can get there in the end with the right approach.
So, John, yesterday we were in a meeting at Westcom, and the comment was made that do we truly believe in solar or not? Do we truly believe in this transition or not? Because when we do podcasts, we tend to apparently come across as we don't believe in renewable energy. And my comment was, if I didn't believe in solar, I don't think I would have it on my rooftop, producing over the last year $2,250 of electricity for me. I certainly wouldn't have invested nearly $100,000 at our shop to do solar. It used to power our entire facility, right? That's a thing of the past now. But I don't think I'd be doing that. The difference is that we also understand that that isn't enough. We're not there today. This tax credit, one of the other things that we didn't mention, it does allow now where you can actually go add batteries to your solar system, and that qualifies. I did think that was a good idea. When I did solar both places, I avoided batteries because that technology to me, I don't have enough money to invest in that only to see it get better. I'm going to wait for a while until it's more efficient, and then possibly I'll do it, and that tax credit would then apply. So I think that's good that they've separated that out and allow it to be done at a future time. And we tell most of our clients that if you're doing solar for the social impact of it, then consider batteries. But if you're doing it for the social impact, you got to think about where those batteries are coming from. And when we think about batteries, we think about minerals. And when you think about minerals, they have to come from the earth. And so far, not very easy to get. There seems to be a movement against getting anything from the earth.
Well, it's not in my backyard movement is what it is, because there's certainly an interest in using batteries and the technology. But if you don't think about some child in Africa digging it up and you don't physically see it, that's fine as you're paddling around the boundary waters in your fantasy world. But the reality is, if we are going down this road, and we are, then we need the critical minerals. It's just a fact. I read an article in the Forbes, I believe it was, where the average mine in the United States of America takes 16 years to get all the permits to open. 16 years. Again, if we look at the climate change predictions or whatever you want to call it, we don't have 16 years. So then what? Answer that.
Yeah, and I can't. I've asked folks in the climate change world that question, and they avoid it, right? Yeah. There is no answer for it. I would hate to see people freeze to death. Until it's felt in your home, you tend to not care or act like it doesn't matter. And so these folks, it's no different than the EV. So a lot of states are now adopting that you must have EV vehicles by a certain year. Those same states this summer, we're doing either rolling blackouts or telling folks, hey, no charging your vehicle from 6 o'clock p.m. to 6 o'clock a.m. Great, because I'll charge it while I'm at work.
Right.
Hello, I need to get to work. I don't know where they're going with that. But I just know that once it impacts people in their home, they'll probably decide that all of a sudden a 16-year permit doesn't make sense and a 1-year permit might make more sense. I have a feeling executive orders will become a real thing once people start freezing, if not recalls and a total revolt.
Well, I have my fingers crossed that does not happen in Europe this winter, but all indications are it's not going to be pleasant.
No. So in closing, we talked a little bit about some of the details about the Inflation Reduction Act, solar tax credit going up to 30%, tons of energy efficiency upgrades that you can get. There's a bunch of politics behind all of it. Contractors need to pay attention because your customers are going to be asking you these questions. And there's tons of detail. You and I were supposed to be prepared for this podcast, remember? But it is a ton of information. But contractors would do themselves a world of good to go get that information and maybe even start educating the public about it, right?
I 100% believe in solar as part of the energy mix. And if solar will help my pocketbook and being more energy efficient, then I am 100% in solar.
Now, with the additional incentives for folks to get that manufacturing back to the U.S., when people ask me, I tell them, listen, I got solar. I love in the summer months getting a negative energy bill. That fires me up. I don't mind that I'm participating in the energy transition. I refuse to use the word green. because my solar panels are black, and I don't know where this whole green thing comes
Correct.
from. Right. And I've been out in the oil field, by the way, many, many, many times. I've got some great friends who live in Wyoming, and I was born in the great state of North Dakota right by the coal plant as Dad was working on it. And guess what? Those places are green. You look around, it's green.
Literally.
My opinion is I really like the solar. I love getting the energy savings on it. I don't mind participating in the energy transition. I was awful happy that, one, I was still warm, and two, even more so, that while I was gone that week, that my backup system worked, which was using very much fossil fuels. And if I wouldn't have had that, I probably wouldn't have had a house. And for some reason, if you don't have a warm house, it's hard to have a happy wife. And I kind of love my wife, so I appreciate that part. So I think there's a lot to look forward to us as we go forward with the energy transition. There's a lot of questions and debate that's going to happen. But folks who are sitting on the sidelines and needed some extra incentive to get some energy improvements done, time to dial in your local contractor.
Absolutely.
Thanks for coming, John.
Thanks for having me.